Hi, my name's Chris from We Communicate. I'm a French teacher, and in this video we'll be talking about the passé simple conjugation in French, which some of you will have seen in novels and such like pieces of writing. So we're going to explain what it does, its reason for being, and more things besides, and I'm going to walk you through the worksheet which is available on wecommunicate.com. And I propose we start with a definition. What is the passé simple? The passé simple is a past tense that's used in writing but has disappeared from usual conversations. Whereas people used it to speak long ago, it's now only seen in its written form. And this is only partly true. What I'm saying is not entirely true, because there are several ways in which you might still hear it in spoken form. Well, the first one is speeches, because there's a common ground when you give a speech between spoken communication, verbal communication, and written communication. So here it's, you know, they sort of blend into each other. The border between the two, the limit between the two can be a bit blurred. So typically you would write a speech if it's a formal speech, right? If it's a formal speech, you might use the passé simple simply because you have to, simply because it makes sense. You don't always use the passé composé. You must sometimes use the passé simple, so it might be relevant to the text you're writing. And of course it comes out orally, it comes out verbally, just because you're reading this piece of writing. So there can be a point when the two meet. Another reason is I sometimes use the passé simple actually with my good friend who's a teacher of French at Alliance Française, and who incidentally I have to thank, because he sort of acts as it's industrial espionage. You know, I have access to all the tricks of French, all the magic that Alliance Française knows about the French language that the rest of us don't have access to. I'm just joking, but when I communicate with him, since we're both enjoyers or lovers of the French language, I don't want to go overboard with this, but we do sometimes communicate with the passé simple. And there are still expressions such as il fut un temps, which you'll hear in everyday French, il fut un temps, ou there was a time when people used to do that. You'll still hear this expression in modern day French. And when I communicate with my friend, the one who shall not be named, who works at Alliance Française, since we're both enjoyers of the French language, we sometimes place it. And just today, in fact, the actual day I'm making this video, I was telling him about some negative comments I get on YouTube, and I told him something along the lines of ils eussent préféré que je ne fus jamais né. They would have preferred that I be never born. And I think it serves its purpose. It's not just poetic, it serves an actual purpose to speak in this tense. So and I might say something like je ne suis pas la réponse, I knew not the answer. It sounds a bit like an inversion, you know, I knew not the answer. Je ne suis pas la réponse if I were to tell a story too. But in all honesty, you'd have to be at, you know, at a literary level of French to enjoy this type of humour slash ambiguated communication. It has a purpose. It's more like a mental stimulation, if you will. You know, between participants of the French language, you might place a passé simple simply for reasons of aesthetic and because it's more pretty. So to go back to our definition of the passé simple, let's look at an example. Je pris une pomme, which translates to I took an apple in English. Je pris is the verb prendre, je pris the verb prendre, to take, I took an apple, je pris une pomme. Now, of course, the English language didn't follow the same evolution and actually still used as the simple past. Yes, it does. But in French, the passé simple was simply replaced by the passé composé. And as an English teacher myself, I find this very interesting because I'm also an English teacher. Oh, yes. So essentially, when you book French classes with myself, you get the best of both worlds, because you also get a French teacher who's a teacher of English, which enables me to see the difference between the tenses and to be able to compare. And it is a fact that the English language still uses the equivalent of the passé simple, two different evolutions completely. And if we were to compare English and French, English makes a difference between I took an apple and I have taken an apple. I took an apple, I have taken an apple. But French doesn't really make this distinction, at least not in spoken communication. Je pris une pomme is the equivalent of I took an apple. J'ai pris une pomme, I have taken an apple. And here also we have a difference between the way Americans speak and the way British people have a tendency to speak. You know, I took an apple would be rather the American way of saying things. It's a simple past, and I have taken an apple is a present perfect tense. British people have a tendency to make more of a distinction between the two, and it comes down to, is the information relevant at the moment I'm talking? So for example, if you walk into the kitchen and you want a piece of cake, and the person you're speaking to, you announce that you want a slice of cake, and they might say, I ate the cake. That would be rather the American way of saying it. But a British person might say, I have eaten it, I have eaten it, while they're using I have eaten it, just to make you understand that the information is relevant now. It's the same thing as saying, I lost my keys and I have lost my keys. Obviously the context might tell you, but in theory at least, it's relevant to make that distinction. I have lost my keys means that it's relevant now. I don't have my keys anymore. I lost my keys might be 10 years ago, right? But as I said, in America you don't really make that distinction anymore. But certainly in French, je pris une pomme, I took an apple, you don't speak like that normally. You're not expected to speak in this way, and you'll never encounter anyone who speaks in this way. No one will ever tell you je pris une pomme, but they will tell you j'ai pris une pomme. You see, just two different evolutions between English and French. I love the way I was able to place that I also teach English. I thought it was very sly of me. So let's go on to talk about the functions of the passé simple. The function of the passé simple, I mentioned already that it had a few uses that you can still encounter today in spoken French, but they are minimal. So officially the function of the passé simple, first of all, it's not used to speak anymore, but this doesn't mean that it's fallen into disregard. It's not because we don't speak with it that it's fallen into disregard. It still has many uses, and it is taught in French-speaking schools to this day. I learned French as a native. I went to school in French. In primary school we were supposed to know it, and in a high school today in any francophone country you're expected to know it. So it's not fallen into disregard. You don't put it on the shelf. It's not collecting dust, right? You're supposed to know it if you're a francophile and you're learning French seriously. So the use of the passé simple is essentially for dynamic actions, right? It's for dynamic actions in novels or even newspaper articles. That's what it does. It conveys dynamic actions. And to explain this, we'll consider the following extract from a story about a detective which I made up. So we're going to look at it, pretend it's a story about a detective out of a novel. Detective Sam has stepped into the empty office and has looked around. All Sam has heard is the clock that has ticked away. Sam has opened a drawer and has found the secret documents. Now the reason this story sounds so odd is that it feels like an observer is commenting on the action that Sam is doing. It has the effect of taking away all the tension and the action side of the story. It's like I'm watching Sam with a pair of binoculars and I'm saying, Detective Sam has stepped into the empty office. Oh, he's looked around, and oh, he's heard that the clock is ticking. Yeah. And Sam's opened a drawer. And, oh, he's found the secret documents. You're completely taken out of the action, because we're using the wrong tense. Okay, this is the way, of course, English works. And it's, as I said, it's almost as if someone was telling about Sam's actions in a walkie-talkie or something with a pair of binoculars. And it has the effect of taking us out of the story and for the tension to fall flat. There's no more tension when we read about the actions of Detective Sam. And it would best be written with the simple past. Of course it would. And the proper way to write about Detective Sam is to say, Detective Sam stepped into the empty office and looked around. All Sam heard was the clock that ticked away. Sam opened a drawer and found the secret documents. This same logic applies to French also. Instead of writing the story in the passé composé, we'll have to write it In the passé simple, let's see what this looks like. We'll look at the same story about Detective Sam, the same detective story in French, by first telling it in the passé composé. Détective Sam est entré dans le bureau vide et a regardé autour de lui. Tout ce qu'il a entendu était l'horloge. Sam a ouvert un tiroir et a trouvé les documents secrets. Just as in English, the story falls flat because it's much too descriptive and it takes us out of the action. We don't feel as if we were in the same room with Detective Sam, and the scene has no tension. And we must properly rewrite it with a passé simple. Détective Sam entra dans le bureau vide et regarda autour de lui. Tout ce qu'il entendit fut l'horloge. Sam ouvrit un tiroir et trouva les documents secrets. And this is the function of the passé simple. To summarize what we've spoken about so far, the passé simple is a dynamic tense, and I'm insisting on the word dynamic. Your own use of it will depend on the type of writing and reading you do in French. If you need to produce a text in the passé simple, it will mostly be for creative writing in which a dynamic action needs to be conveyed. To be clear, it's not used in text messages, phones, postcards, emails, or any other modern context. You'll just never use the passé simple in these contexts. And it's the same reason we distinguish suddenly she saw the answer from she has seen the answer. And in one of the two sentences there's more tension. Suddenly she saw the answer, she has seen the answer. Different dynamics, right? So the passé simple, the simple past, is the more dynamic of the two when we write. The passé simple is much more dynamic than the passé composé. Let's now talk about a practical application of the passé simple by looking at our ER verbs, the ER verbs, those that end in ER. There are 6 verb endings that we need to memorize, as always in French. It's always the same 6 endings, really. So the following are the ones with the ER verbs exclusively, not the others, and we have as examples parler, aller, and danser. And you notice here in orange there are 6 endings that you need to know to become a user of the passé simple. So parler, to speak, this translates to I spoke, you spoke, he spoke. Je parlais, AI makes the sound e. Je parlais, so je parlais makes exactly the same sound as parler that ends in er. So the infinitive parler is the same as je parlais, same sound exactly. Je parlais, tu parlas, il, elle parla, nous parlâmes, beautiful, nous parlâmes, vous parlâtes, I love that, vous parlâtes, il, elle parlèrent. I'll repeat that once more. Je parlais, tu parlas, il, elle parla, nous parlâmes, vous parlâtes, il, elle parlèrent. Let's now look at a verb such as aller, which means to go. J'allais, so aller is the same sound as the infinitive aller. J'allais, tu allas, il alla, nous allâmes, vous allâtes, ils allèrent. And danser, je dansais, tu dansas, il dansa, nous dansâmes, vous dansâtes, ils, elles dansèrent. That's the passé simple of ER verbs. You have 6 endings to know: e, a, am, at, and er. It should be noted that the passé simple of tu, vous, are the least used of them all. Tu and vous, for the following reason, because it's rare to address people while telling them about a dynamic action they performed. You know how it would make less sense to tell someone you spoke, you know, in a dynamic way. It's just reasons of, you know, practical reasons of communication that wouldn't ever happen. So you wouldn't address someone by saying tu parlas or vous parlâtes, like you spoke well, vous parlâtes bien. It's even in a novel, it would be a bit odd. Also, if you ever read a scene out loud from a novel, who knows, in school or at university, be mindful of the pronunciation of the first one, je. It ends in ai, but it does make the sound e. Je parlais, we saw 3 examples, I tried to insist on them. So the ai in je parlais shouldn't be confused with ais in je parlais. These are two different sounds, right? It's not the imparfait, it is the passé simple. So the first is the sound E, as in bébé, a baby, but the second is E, as in merci. Next we have an exercise which I'm skipping, which you'll find on the website, and we have the IR verbs next, those that end in IR. The IR verbs behave in a very similar way, but have different endings, just to complicate your life essentially. We'll look at partir, ouvrir and sentir, so they don't end in e, a, and all that. These are 6 different endings. Partir sounds as follows: je partis, tu partis, il, elle partit, nous partîmes, vous partîtes, il, elle partirent. Je partis, tu partis, il, elle partit, nous partîmes, vous partîtes, il, elle partirent. Next we have ouvrir as an example. J'ouvris, tu ouvris, il ouvrit, nous ouvrîmes, vous ouvrîtes, ils, elles ouvrirent. And sentir, to smell or to feel. Je sentis, tu sentis, il, elle sentit, nous sentîmes, vous sentîtes, ils, elles sentirent. I personally feel that vous sentîtes, all the passé simple endings of vous in the IR ones sound odd. It's almost as if French had to find a solution and to put it for the sake of putting it, even though there's really hardly any practical application for this even in novels. There are some irregular IR verbs to make your life even more complicated, which have different endings from the majority. And these are venir, tenir and courir. Venir to come, tenir to hold, courir to run. So I propose we look at them. Venir, je vins, same sound as the wine that we drink. Je vins, tu vins, il vint, elle vint. Nous vîmes, vous vîntes, ils, elles vinrent. I'll repeat that. Je vins, tu vins, il vint. Nous vîmes, vous vîntes, ils vinrent. We have tenir, to hold. Je tins, tu tins, il, elle tint. Nous tîmes, vous tîntes, ils, elles tinrent. And then we have courir. Je courus, tu courus, il, elle courut. Nous courûmes, vous courûtes, ils, elles coururent. And the one that surprises me the most is always vous. It sounds strangely antiquated. It's, I don't know, vous vîntes, vous tîntes, vous courûtes. Try it on a native speaker of French, see if they'll understand you. I doubt it. Then we have an exercise which I'm skipping and that you'll find on the website, of course. Next we have those that end in OIR, a very small category of verbs, OIR, but oh so important. Of the small number of OIR verbs that are frequently used in French, 2 of them are only used with il, of course, and these are pleuvoir and falloir. Pleuvoir, it is raining, and falloir, which is an equivalent of must. So il plut would mean it rained, il plut, and il fallut would translate to it was necessary to do something, il plut and il fallut. The other verbs follow the same pattern throughout, but the main difficulty being knowing where to cut them up, of course. And we'll go through avoir, devoir, pouvoir, savoir, vouloir, 5 verbs that are very, very important, of course, because they contain the modal verbs, and these are very necessary to speak. So we have jus for like the juice that you drink, jus, so this is avoir, to have, and this translates to I had. Jus, tu eus, il, elle eut, nous eûmes, vous eûtes, ils, elles eurent. I'll repeat that once more. Jus, tu eus, il, elle eut, nous eûmes, vous eûtes, ils, elles eurent. That's the verb avoir in the passé simple. Then we have devoir, must. Je dus, tu dus, il, elle dut, nous dûmes, vous dûtes, ils, elles durent. And I can't say I've heard too many times vous dûtes. It's probably the first time I've ever heard it. I ought to celebrate this. Je dus, tu dus, il, elle dut, nous dûmes, vous dûtes, il, elle durent. Then we have pouvoir, which translates to can, the ability or permission. Je pus, tu pus, il, elle put, nous pûmes, vous pûtes, il, elle purent. Je pus, tu pus, il put, nous pûmes, vous pûtes, ils purent. So this might mean we were capable of doing something, or we were able, or we had the permission to do something. Next we have savoir. Je sus, tu sus, il sut, nous sûmes, vous sûtes, ils surent. Je sus, tu sus, il sut, nous sûmes, vous sûtes, ils surent. And then vouloir. Je voulus, tu voulus, il voulut, nous voulûmes, vous voulûtes, ils voulurent. Je voulus, tu voulus, il, elle voulut, nous voulûmes, vous voulûtes, il, elle voulurent. Next we have our exercises, which we're not doing here, which brings us to the fourth one, the fourth class of verbs, the RE verbs. When it comes to RE verbs, the conjugation sees more variety than in the other classes, and most are based on a E ending, the letter E, while others have a U ending, the letter U, as well as the irregular ones, of course, just to make things fun. So we'll look at one of each. We'll use rendre, croire and être as an example. So rendre would be a typical ending in the passé simple, rendre, to give back something. Je rendis, tu rendis, il, elle rendit, nous rendîmes, vous rendîtes, il, elle rendirent. Je rendis, tu rendis, il, elle rendit, nous rendîmes, vous rendîtes, il, elle rendirent. Then we have croire, to believe, and this one ends in U, and you can tell that it's cut up in a very, very strange place. Je crus, tu crus, il, elle crut, nous crûmes, vous crûtes, il, elle crurent. Je crus, tu crus, il, elle crut, nous crûmes, vous crûtes, il, elle crurent. And to represent the irregular ones, we have être, to be. Je fus, tu fus, il, elle fut, nous fûmes, vous fûtes, il, elle furent. Je fus, tu fus, il, elle fut, nous fûmes, vous fûtes, il, elle furent. And we come to the conclusion of this video. Well, to conclude, through all these exercises, which I've skipped, we've seen how the passé simple conveys actions within a written context. And it should be noted that it is a necessary skill. I consider it to be a necessary skill in order to read and enjoy French literature, and even children's books, by the way. It's by no means a less important tense, despite it not being an oral tense. It's not because it's not spoken that it's not important. And since it describes actions, the passé simple is hardly, if ever, used with questions, interestingly, and this will be the last point of this video. So you'll never hear alla-t-il avec toi? Did he go with you? Alla-t-il avec toi? It just doesn't work. You'll never hear this sort of thing, you know, did he go with you? Because these would just be seen as mistakes. Because we'll rather use the passé composé, just as we would perhaps in English. You know, what is the result? Did he go with you? Est-ce qu'il est allé avec toi? Rather than est-ce qu'il alla avec toi? It would sound rather weird. I hope this video was useful for all you Francophiles out there. You'll find this beautiful exercise on the website wecommunicate.com. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it was useful. My name is Chris. Au revoir. Merci beaucoup.